It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. And our speaker is Tamika Williams, who's the Associate Director of Training and Technical Assistance at the National Resource Center for the Recruitment and Retention of Foster and Adoptive Parents at Adopt Us Kids. And I just have to tell you, I went to hear Tamika speak recently, but it wasn't the first time I had met Tamika. The National Resource Center for Adoption, one of their charges is to oversee and carry out the Minority Adoption Leadership Development Institute, which is mandated actually by legislation and is a way to promote workforce development among emerging leaders of color across the country. And they just do a wonderful job. This is the beginning of their third institute. And if you want more information about MALDI, and I hope that you do because it's a wonderful opportunity for staff, you should see Janice King. And Janice King, would you stand up so everybody can see, so they can come talk to you at the break? She does a wonderful job. And so to be a participant in MALDI, Tamika's going to tell you a little bit more about that, but to be a participant, you have to not only go to a series of wonderful sessions and classes on site at the NRC for Adoption about all sorts of topics that are of interest. You also have to take on an important project back in your state, and you're nurtured by a mentor. And I think the mentors get as much out of it as the mentees do. It's a wonderful program. And Jane Morgan's going to talk to you a little bit later today about some other exciting ways that the Children's Bureau is trying to promote workforce development. But we're very proud of MALDI. It's a wonderful program. So the first time I got to see Tamika, she was graduating from MALDI, and she was very impressive at that time. This time at their meeting, they had the alumni from MALDI come back, and many, such as Tamika, have moved up and on and become true leaders in their states and across the country. And so they asked the MALDI alumni to reflect on, what did you learn? How did MALDI benefit you, and what did you get out of it? And I have to say, when Tamika stopped talking, now see, I'm going to get choked up already. There was not a dry eye in the room because she talked about not only her professional journey, but her personal values and how that got developed by her family and her grandfather. It was very touching. See, I'm all choked up already. Anyway, so it was just really one of those, I was sort of like witnessing a moment of grace, and I wish we had it on tape, but we didn't, so we asked her, can you do that again? So... So I want you to listen not only for the content in terms of really what is a strength-based way to look at family and permanency and well-being for children, but also how does workforce development really find those diamonds in the rough on your staff, and really some of them are not that rough, but really how can you promote and support emerging leaders in your organization. So just for all those different reasons, I thought it would be great for you to hear from her today. So I give you Tamika Williams.
Good morning, everybody. Oh, I want to thank Heidi for such an introduction, and it was indeed an experience to be with them in Detroit a couple months back, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here again this morning. And when Heidi asked me to come back to have a few words, and she said she wished that we could have had it on tape, I don't know that we could duplicate what was in that room that night, but I can certainly share with you what I shared with them then. And so what I'm going to share today with you is deeply personal. It's not something that we often get a chance to share in a room because of the work that we do, and we're so focused on working with others that sometimes you don't know the journey that other people have been through. So this is indeed an opportunity. I gladly share it with you because I think it is who I am. And it talks about my personal and my professional journey, which is not at all over at this point in my life. So thank you very much, and thank everybody for the opportunity. All right, I had to go back and get my glasses because I felt like I couldn't see. So the last time I was able to talk to him was Sunday, July the 2nd, 2006. I walked into a cold hospital room, and the sun was shining brightly. It was just he and I. As usual, I was coming to sit with him for what would turn out to be hours, and as usual, the hours passed like seconds. I reached out to touch his arm, and by now he was very unresponsive. I'm not even sure if he was able to open his eyes, but I know he knew that I was there. He was beyond sick now. He was dying. My mind reflected back to his words to me just 2 years earlier during another of his hospital stays when I was preparing to leave him. He looked at me and gave me his last guiding words. He said, "Take care of yourself." And in that moment, more than those words were being said, that was his goodbye. And while I sat with him in 2006, I talked and talked like only I could, being so grateful for the moments we were sharing and the life we'd lived together. I pulled out his Bible, which is also my roadmap, and wrote and read his favorite psalm, Psalm 1. And as I prepared to leave and walked toward the door, I turned back to look at him lying on that bed, and as if I were finishing the conversation we had begun 2 years before, I said to him, "I love you, and I always will." That was my goodbye. His name was Robert Odell Williams, Sr. He was known to some as Little Buddy or Rob. He was a son, a brother, a husband, a father, a friend, a neighbor, but to me, he was my granddaddy and one of the greatest examples of an African-American male I have known. He was one who could make much out of very little. He was an awesome teacher, and even though I didn't know it, I was his constant student. I was his hope. I was his future. Even though I wasn't born until 1973. When he was born on May the 31st, 1929, opportunity, love, purpose, possibility, and promise were born into my life. My grandfather, without a high school education, had intelligence unparalleled. Without wealth, he possessed an internal fortitude that opened doors that were sealed. He was deemed insignificant or irrelevant by folks in the majority culture, yet he had an assuming presence that surrounds even unto this day. He was called boy. He was taunted as he walked to school, as white children hurled obscenities at him, yet by the end of his life, he'd been married for 56 years, was the father of 10, had built his own home, and found time to rear me and admonish me in a Christian household. He could seize opportunity with very little in his hand. He was tempered and patient all the time working. His unspoken life lesson to me was, you're no better than anyone else, but you're just as good as everybody else. Again, I say, when he was born, opportunity, love, promise, possibility, and purpose were born into my life. And I truly believe to whom much is given, much is required. Because of him, I know hot summer afternoons. I know how dusty clouds form as cars travel down dirt roads. I know how to play hopscotch and draw them out with sticks. I know how it feels to stand in the middle of a dirt road and try to figure out which way you want to go. To one end of the road, you can go play with cousins, and if you go to the other end, you can go play with a group of boys that'll probably get you in a bunch of trouble, but that was my opportunity. Oh, probably not the best choice, but they were options for me. Yeah, I remember those trips with my grandmother to huge fields where my grandfather would be tending beans or collards or whatever. Those days were often early morning trips or midday with the sun high overhead. It was so hot out there, and yet he was there, bent over, tilling the ground. Because of him, I know the smell of crackling wood in a wood-burning stove on cold winter nights. I know my great aunts and uncles. I even had an opportunity to get to know my great great aunts and uncles. They all came to my house. And as an only child for most of my childhood, I was happy to have cousins galore. In the vernacular that we use today, it meant that I knew safety, permanence, and well-being. In my words, I knew what true wealth was. I learned life's most important lessons, the importance of faith, because we were surrounded by it, the importance of my family, they were always there, and the community because they sustained us along the way. As important as my grandfather was in my life, time will not allow me to tell you about the teachers and the mentors who nurtured and invested in me. I don't have time to really tell you about my second grade teacher, Della Baker, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about her because she was so significant. She was an African-American lady who wore these little black-rimmed, pointed glasses, and her hair used to tilt up like, you guys remember Bewitched Samantha, and it just had this tight little curl that would do this. She was older, and she was always so serious, but she taught me one of my most enduring lessons, because at that time I had an awful habit of giving up, and I would just say, I can't. It was so easy for me not to try. Well, one day she'd had a little too much of that, and this was the day where paddling was still allowed in the schools. She didn't paddle me, but she did something which hurt me just as bad. She politely invited me over to her desk, and she asked me to hold out my hand. Then she politely pulled my fingers back, and she struck me across my palm with a ruler and said to me, "Stop saying what you can't do. As long as you say that, you won't ever do it." I remember that to this day. It's etched in my memory. She's in my memory. I can't tell you about the others like Gail Perry and Barbara Robinson and Esther High, who most of you in this room may know, how they unselfishly availed themselves to me, encouraged my desire to know and to experience. Folks who opened doors for me, and I stand by, to whom much is given, much will be required. So you may ask yourself, why would I choose to share this story? And that's a great question. Not only because Heidi asked me to. Quite simply, it's my story. And my story, why it is unique to me, is not much different than the children that we serve in our system. When I say we didn't have much, we didn't have much. My upbringing may not be very different than those families that we classify as high risk. I think by the time my grandfather and grandmother, who were married for 56 years, by the time they were 24, they had 7 children. So they were very young with a large family to support. I invite you to just think about what I've reflected on with you and what my enduring memories are about my childhood. And I will share with this too because I reflected on what I remember and what sticks out. But of course, I can also share with you that my grandparents did have 10 children, and we had 1 bathroom. And that bathroom didn't have a lock with a door. It was made of wood, and we would prop a board between the bathtub and the door to lock it while we were in the bathroom. We had running water, but we didn't have running hot water. So we had to boil our water to wash our dishes, to wash our clothes, to bathe. And do you guys remember skeleton keys? You guys remember? Well, those were the keys that opened my house. Nothing at all sophisticated. So if I ever locked myself out of the house, it was no problem. I could always find a neighbor with a skeleton key and could borrow one from them. I also remember distinctly the day when I was waiting for the school bus, and my grandfather came from around the house in his work overalls. He always wore overalls. And he asked me in his big baritone voice, he said, "Tamika, give me a hug and a kiss." And I was waiting for the school bus. And I said to him, "Hurry up before everybody sees you." That moment touches me so much because my granddaddy remembered that up until his memory began to fail him. And I will tell you, if he was here today, I would parade him in front of you with those overalls and applaud and implore you to give him a standing ovation. Why this was a reality for me, none of these things, in terms of what we did not have, those things were not important. It wasn't important. We had exactly what we needed, and those life lessons sustained us, and that was our faith, our family, and our community, much like the children that we're seeing today. While here, our charge is to make connections, is making connections. It's no mystery our children need connections, and the truth is, families want to parent them. People with limited income who live in rural communities, who have multiple children, who have the basic education, people who work really hard. What helped me to make my connections and to bridge my personal life and my professional ambitions was MALDI, the Minority Adoption Leadership Development Institute. When I came to MALDI, the life that I'd been given, my childhood years, my maturation into a woman, my relationship with my nuclear and my generationally extended family, my Christianity, and my commitment to following the Lord Jesus merged with my professional purpose, and it brought me surety. During my MALDI experience, I learned more about this thing that we heard Commissioner Samuels talk about yesterday that most of us are in this room are very familiar with, was disproportionality. I'd lived it, I'd worked in it, I'd seen it, but I really didn't know it by name. MALDI allowed me to pursue a project that looked at disproportionality and programs and services. It allowed me the freedom to research more, to ask more questions, to peer around for more answers, to go beyond the no, to go beyond a state of indifference, to go beyond myself. The questions that came to me and from the information that was shared, they stimulated my interest. More than anything, I recognized that the faces at the end of those case numbers, those faces that enter care at higher rates, those faces that linger in the system longer, those faces that exit to permanency slower, in this day of what we call equalities, those faces look just like mine. You have to ask yourself, why and what can be done? When you know that the research says that families are out there waiting and are able to provide permanence, families just like mine who struggle to be approved to adopt our children. When you know that kin won't adopt and or to foster children, when you know there are community teachers like Ms. Baker and mentors who have more than enough to give, when you know and recognize the pain in a child's heart that's been separated and never reunited with his or her community, family, and or faith, we have totally stripped them, and you can no longer sit by and do nothing. It's like fire shut up in your bones. I see the need for opportunity, love, purpose, possibility, and promise to be born and lived in their lives. Remember my grandfather's message to me, even though it was unspoken. I'm no better than anyone else, but I'm just as good as everybody else. And all of our children, regardless of their color, regardless of their social economic status, need to know that message. So MALDI was the next step for me. It helped prepare me for what I do now as the Associate Director of the longest named NRC in existence. For those of you who may not, the recruitment and retention of foster and adopted parents that adopt as kids. I know that children and youth are precious. I know the simple things in life and the lessons they teach are the most enduring lessons. I know that I can't do all, but if I plant into a child's life, God will give the increase. I know that children can grow and thrive in families, and I know we can make that happen. I know we can help states address the needs of families and children who come into the contact with the child welfare system. In closing, I say thank you and God bless.